Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club. My name is Jim Foster and I'm the Executive Director of the City Club of Cleveland. We are pleased to welcome you to this City Club of the City held today at Plymouth Church. City Club of the City is our way to bring our 100-year legacy of programs and dialogue to the community. This is the fourth program in our City Club of the City initiative. And I very much appreciate the words from Denny McCann, a longtime member and strong supporter of the City Club. And I thank you for your membership. It does mean a great deal to us. It is very important in the City Club that we identify and bring to the podium those issues that are of the greatest importance to our community. And nothing has as great an impact as education. We have featured programs that address the current thinking in education reform, including Michelle Reed, Wendy Cobb. Diane Ramage is scheduled for February. Thanks to the help of City Club member Reuben Harris, we are pleased today to welcome a most distinguished education reformer, Dr. Ronald Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson has been on the faculty at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government since 1983 and is currently senior lecturer in education and public policy. Dr. Ferguson has spent his career researching issues in education policy, youth development, community development, the economic consequences of skill disparities, and state and local economic development. His teachings and publications have focused on the racial achievement gap. Dr. Ferguson travels the country visiting racially mixed public high schools. In part, he is measuring the causes of the achievement gap, but he is also meeting with students and faculty to give them tools needed to narrow the gap. He has shown through concrete research that half the gap can be predicted by economics. The other half is that African American parents are not as academically oriented in raising their children as white parents. A native of Cleveland, Dr. Ferguson attended John F. Kennedy High School. He earned an undergraduate degree from Cornell University and a PhD from MIT. Both in economics. His most recent book, Towards Excellence with Equity, An Emerging Vision for Closing the Achievement Gap, was published in 2008. And a cultural exchange will have a copy of Dr. Ferguson's book available after the program in the park. I'm sure Dr. Ferguson will be glad to sign this for you. Dr. Ferguson has also created a tripod project for school improvement, supporting leaders in schools, districts, and states with education services. It is a distinct honor to welcome Dr. Ron Ferguson to the City Club and to the church publicly. Dr. Ferguson.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is the notion that we are in the early phases of a national social movement, for what I call the movement for excellence with equity. It's not just about achievement gaps. If we only worry about achievement gaps, we can end up in a situation of mediocrity. The goal has to be to help all of our children to rise toward excellence, and to do that in a way that's also mindful of equity. We care about equity, but we need to privilege excellence so that we can bring children from all kinds of backgrounds to be among the highest achievers in the world. We are no longer the leading nation in the world academically. Even when we talk about our white kids, there are 14 other countries where students have higher math test scores by the time they're in their mid-teens than do white children in the United States. We often talk as if white children in the United States are leading the world, and it's mainly the students of color who are behind. Well, even our white kids are not leading the world. So when we talk about a national movement for excellence with equity, it's got to be to bring all of our groups up so that we can reach a state that we sometimes refer to as group proportional equality. The notion is that at the individual level, there's going to be a bell-shaped curve. Well, we ought to get to the place where knowing somebody's race or ethnicity doesn't tell you anything about whether they fall under the top part of the curve or the middle part of the curve or the bottom part of the curve. And the entire curve needs to be slid up way to the right so that it represents overall a really high level of achievement, right? So we want equity, but we also want excellence. So it's excellence with equity. And just to comment on something you just heard in the introduction, I was profiled in the New York Times this February. It was a really nice profile. But there was one line in it that was mistaken and that went viral on the internet. And one of them was a line that was just in the introduction there. It said that my research has shown that half of the achievement gap is due to economics and the other half is due to the fact that African American parents are not as achievement-oriented in their parenting practices. There's some statement that's kind of related to that is closer to the truth, but that was not my finding in the research. That's not something I said to the reporter. That's an interpretation that he reached. He put that in the New York Times. It went viral on the internet because I saw it. I got calls and people said, "I don't think you said this, did you?" And I said, "No, I didn't say that." And we Googled it, and that phrase is all over the internet. That it's half economics and half parenting. Okay. Now, there are some studies that show that when you take background into account and you take parenting practices into account, you can predict pretty much the whole achievement gap. There are two studies by a guy named Jelani Mandara at Northwestern University, and there is some evidence that the achievement gap is in place by age 3. And I'll come back and talk about that in a minute, and it's clearly in place by age 5. And I think parenting is a big chunk of it. But that particular formulation that says it's half economics and half parenting, that's not from me. And even I think Jelani Mandara, whose work is more closely based on, probably wouldn't phrase it quite that way. What I'm going to talk to you about is the notion that there are 5 big... The water? I keep bumping it. There are 5 big... I'll just put it over here. I won't be waving my hands in that direction. There are 5 big clusters of things that we need to work on. First is parents and parenting. The second is teaching in schools. The third is peer dynamics and the way students relate to one another and treat one another. The fourth is the role of the employer community in particular, but beyond that, more generally, adult organizations. And then the fifth is just community. And for each of those, imagine a diagram that's got 5 big circles. Those are the 5 circles: parents, teachers, peers, employers, and community. And for each of those 5 circles, there are 2 little circles. And I want to talk through what those 2 little circles are for each of the 5 circles. And I want to suggest to you that that diagram that has 5 inner circles and 10 outer circles is, for me, an image of the movement. It's what we need to attend to in a movement for excellence with equity. A couple little sayings and a poem that I wanted to throw in here at the beginning because they also help for me to frame what we're talking about. There's a saying by Robert Schuller that any fool can count the seeds in an apple. Again, any fool can count the seeds in an apple. It's like counting points on a test. But only God can count the apples in a seed. Okay, the apples in a seed are latent, unharvested potential. And our responsibility is to try to harvest as many apples from the seed as possible. In other words, to help our children to realize their potential as fully as they possibly can. And here, it's not just about helping our high-achieving children or the ones with the high test scores to achieve as much as they can. It's about helping every one of our children to find their mission in the world, to find their special contribution, and to live it out. Okay? Another mental picture I'm going to ask you to indulge me on. Imagine XY coordinate. Okay? And there's skills. So you got certain kinds of skills on one axis, certain kinds of skills on the other axis. And then you have 3 arrows coming out of the origin. One that's really long and kind of in a flattish direction, sort of long out in the X direction. Another that's kind of long out in the Y direction. And then a little short one that's about halfway between those 2. And the short one is shorter on both the vertical and the horizontal direction. Okay, and that little short arrow is like one of our kids looking around thinking, everybody's smarter than I am. Everybody's better than I am at everything. I may as well just not even try. Okay? But now imagine that there's a point out here, and only that little arrow is pointing at it. There's something the world needs to have done that's right out there in the middle, and the other two arrows that are longer are not going in that direction for that particular point that's out here. And if that thing is going to get done in the world, it's only going to be because that little arrow doesn't give up, because it keeps going, and it finally reaches that point out there. Okay, and that point might be something about having somebody's grandmother be taken care of when they're older, or having a couple kids get some attention that they might have needed, or having some kids have a coach for a little league. Okay, it's something that needs to get done in the world and won't get done unless that little arrow does it. Okay, and so for our kids who struggle, we need to help them know that given what their mission is in life, there's nobody ahead of them. Okay? Because getting that point out there reached, there's nobody ahead of that little arrow because nobody else is going there. Right? And so for each kid, you don't need to pay attention what anybody else is doing. You just need to figure out what you're supposed to achieve in life, what your mission is, and then you need to work really hard and get it done. And our job as adults is to help them find what that is and then support them in their efforts to go out and get it done. Right? So it's about harvesting as many apples from each seed as we can and making sure that each apple has its own distinct flavor, so to speak, to reach that destination. Now, to make that happen at a national level, we need a change in national lifestyle. Right? One little thing is that we need lifestyles that enhance life chances. And every one of our institutions has a lifestyle. Okay, our families have lifestyles, our schools have lifestyles, our employers have lifestyles in the way that they run their organizations, our communities have lifestyles. We're just talking about ways of being. We can think of these, we can call them cultures if you want. But there's certain ways of being, there's certain ways of spending your time, certain ways of allocating your attention that are more likely to enhance life chances than are other ways. And if we're going to get to where we need to get to as a nation, we need to tweak our entire lifestyle to be more focused on helping our youth to realize their human potential on dimensions that matter. Right? And so the question is how do we do that? And I want to suggest to you that there are a lot of people who are kind of already sensing we need to and are kind of already in motion. And we need to build this sense, this spirit of collective endeavor to realize all of us are part of something that's bigger than we are and that there are lots of other people who care about the same things and are working on the same things. And there's nobody in charge and there's not going to be anybody in charge. But it's about building this sense of momentum. The civil rights movement didn't have anybody in charge. It just had a lot of people who cared about making a difference, who worked together to make a difference. And a lot of us would not be in this room today if it had not been for the civil rights movement and what they did. I don't know how many of you know that I'm from Cleveland. My mother and my two brothers are sitting in the front row up here. I grew up in Lee Harvard. First time I ever thought about teaching at Harvard, I can remember the moment. I was 12 years old. I was on 164th Street in Sorrento, just a couple blocks, a block south, just north of Miles. And I was out collecting for my plain deal of paper route. And I had on a T-shirt that said Howard. And I was thinking, I was looking, oh, Howard, that's a university. And I said, I like school, maybe I want to be a teacher someday. So why not teach at college level? And then I said, Howard, that sounds like, there's another thing that sounds, Harvard sounds like Howard. Harvard, that's the big deal one. And I said, why not teach there? Who gets to teach at Harvard? What determines whether you teach at Harvard? And it was such a big thought at the moment, teaching at Harvard, that it kind of stuck with me. I still remember the moment. Okay, and I was lucky enough to grow up in a community that launched me in a direction to make that possible. And our job is to launch our children to do whatever it is they're meant to do. Okay? Now, let me talk through these 10 circles. The first circle, again, the first big circle is parents. And for that circle, there are two little ones. One is parenting, and the other is parent-school engagement. Parenting has to do with how parents interact with their kids in the context of the family. It's not about school. It's about parent-child dynamics. We hosted a conference on parenting in the end of June. Actually, yesterday we just loaded somewhere between 30 and 40 videos on our website at the Achievement Gap Initiative at Harvard from that parenting conference. The web address is agi.harvard.edu. So if you go to agi.harvard.edu, look under What's New, you'll see a notification of the posting of the parenting videos. You click on that, you have to wait about 3 minutes because it loads all those videos. And you'll see it has a little caption and a little screenshot from each one. They're mostly about 10 minutes long. And the researchers talking about what we've learned over the last decade or so about what constitutes effective parenting. And they're very interesting. Okay, one of the most interesting is about gesturing, using hand signals, talking with your hands when you're talking with an infant, and with, 1, 2, 3-year-old. Turns out gesturing accelerates language development. The kids will learn to point, talk with their hands. There's some discussion of even having to do with math development. Okay. A lot of discussion at the conference about the importance of talking to kids. A lot of people think, why should I talk to that baby? He doesn't know what I'm talking about. Okay. But it turns out kids are encoding the language and the sounds from the moment of birth, and actually even prenatal. There's a study that indicates that European babies cry in the rhythm of their mother's native language. And there's another study that indicates that babies are soothed by singing in their mother's native language, but not by singing in other languages. Okay? So there's something kids are taking in from the very earliest moments. So some of the researchers are saying, we need to just narrate life to our infants. Whatever you're doing, just talk. Not stupid baby talk, but actual real language. Okay. And so that they just learn those sounds and it accelerates language development. People are using games with 2-year-olds to teach number sense and ordinality and the foundations of math. So little games where you spin the arrow maybe and then you move something a certain number of spaces depending upon where the arrow landed. That's teaching kids sequence and ordinality. It's laying the foundation for math. A study that says if you give 2-year-olds freedom to crawl around and explore the house, it predicts visual motor integration by age 4 and math skills by age 8. There's one study, maybe there are other studies that don't find the same thing, but they're just hints. I mean, imagine the 2-year-old crawling around, imagining what's on the other side of the furniture that he's about to crawl around. He's using his mind's eye. He's building the mental capabilities to reason in 3 dimensions, to do mathematics. Okay? There are studies that indicate the nature of the bedtime conversation with a 3-year-old predicts comprehension growth from ages 3 to 4. And the thing is that we need conversations that combine lower order thinking with higher order thinking. So simple descriptive questions like, what's that? Oh, that's a dog. But then more higher order questions like, what do you think would have happened if he had opened that door instead of the other door? Or what would you do next if you were them? Okay. Those kinds of conversations at bedtime when you're reading a book, combining lower order and higher order thinking, predict how much their mental capabilities grow over the next year. A lot of us don't think about having that conversation. We read a book. We're trying to get them to go to sleep, right? So there are a number of things that we're learning that parents can do them differently tonight if we just tell them. Okay? But we don't tell them. They don't know what it looks like. Okay? With the older kids, balancing demandingness and structures and clear rules on the one hand with warmth and responsiveness and expressions of love on the other hand. For all racial groups, families that are above average on both structure and demandingness and warmth and responsiveness are the ones whose kids achieve the most. That seems to be the optimal parenting style for everybody. I have a colleague, Jelani Mandara, who became a researcher on these topics because he wanted to discover the best parenting style for black people. He said, all the research is on whites. I needed to find out for blacks what produces the best result. And much to his surprise, and maybe even slightly to his disappointment, he found it wasn't a different style. It was the same style that produces the best outcomes for blacks. It produces the best outcomes for whites and Hispanics. Not many Asians, but maybe even for Asians. Asians tend to have a different pattern. Asian kids tend to be sometimes even shamed into achieving. They're afraid that they will undermine their honor in which their family is held if they don't do well. The kids' performance sometimes is a main foundation for the family's reputation in the community. Okay, so they're afraid. Asian kids' self-esteem drops pretty rapidly as their GPAs go below an A. In the surveys we do a lot of surveying, we measure self-esteem. And so there's a certain kind of pressure there that the Asian kids have. And even when they're performing at the highest levels, there's some question of, well, do we really want to do that to our kids? To just make them sort of afraid not to produce at really high levels? We might or might not, but in any case, the notion of being high on support and high on structure and demand is where we want to get to. Okay? When black folks get it wrong, we're kind of high on demandingness, but not very high on responsiveness. You know, it's like do, because I said I'm the grown-up, I said do it, just do it, don't ask me any questions. Okay. When white folks get it wrong, it's the opposite. They're kind of really permissive. You know, we've seen the 3-year-old who throws a tantrum in the grocery store, the mother's talking in soft tones, trying to get him to behave. And so we get these differences in cultural patterns that we need to work on across all of our communities. Okay, there are actually 4 main styles we talk about with parenting. It's one that's high on both. That's authoritative. One is high on demandingness and low on responsiveness and warmth is authoritarian. One is high on responsiveness and warmth but low on demandingness is permissive. It's permissive. And the one that's low on both dimensions is neglectful. And some folks argue that neglectful is not a style that any parent chooses. Parents who are neglectful are kind of just stressed out. They're overmatched. They can't cope. They need help. But the other 3 tend to be philosophical differences. Parents choose to be that way on purpose. And we need to get evidence to them that shows them there's a different way that might even work better. And we have to do it respectfully. Nobody wants to have folks come in disrespectfully being critical. But if we approach our communities with the notion that, hey folks, we can do better. Okay, there's some ways we did it in the past and there are reasons we did it that way, but at this point in history, we can do better. And here's some of the ideas about how to do that. And we need to get that idea out. So anyway, I spent more time on that first circle than I'm going to spend on the others as I go around. But that first one is parenting. And for a lot of it, people don't even know what it looks like to do some of what I'm talking about. So we've got to find ways to use videos. We need to have community meetings. We have to have discussions and debates. We need to provide social supports where people get supported and have communities they can belong to of other people who are trying to do the same thing. But there's no reason we can't do quite a bit better on parenting in all segments of our community, not just any one segment. Okay. The second circle that goes with parents is home-school relations. Schools and families, parents working together cooperatively to support the child. There are ideas there, but I won't linger there. The third circle is teachers working together to improve their craft. So it's teachers finding ways to watch each other teach, to share ideas about instruction, to bring in ideas from outside of their school community, and to just collaborate with one another on trying to become better teachers. And there are lots of ways that can be done. Most schools do not do it nearly to the degree that they could. Most schools, the administrators are often trying to keep everybody happy. As long as everybody's happy, all's good. But if there's no stress on a system, the system stays at rest. If there's too much stress on a system, you kill it. The goal is to raise the stress level just enough so people can't be comfortable doing things the way they've always done them. And they find some impulse to move, do something differently, but don't raise it so high that everybody tries to escape or just dies. You kill it. Okay? And so We need to find ways where everybody's got a place. Sometimes I use the example when we do school improvement work, is it's easy to get the choir to sing, but it's hard to get the congregation to sing. Okay? We got to find ways to get the whole congregation to sing, and the schools are getting the very highest gains in test scores. Not the highest levels, but the highest growth from one year to the next, are getting the whole congregation to sing when they do teacher professional development. So that's the third circle. The fourth circle is studying our students' work and learning about our students from the work that they produce. Studying the patterns and the mistakes, trying to infer from those patterns what it is they don't understand, maybe why they don't understand it, what we might do differently to help them understand it better. But studying the work. We've got a protocol we sometimes use to do that, and pretty much every time I've sat and watched teachers work through and examine their students' work, they get up from the conversation an hour later, understanding what they saw differently, having found some new insights to understand their kids. I've had worked with lots of schools who agreed they need to do that. I cannot point to one school that has institutionalized it and just continue to do it regularly, regular review and study student work. So that's circle 4. Circle 5 is, now this is the big circle of peers now. So 1 and 2 are parents, 2 and 3 are teaching and teachers, and circle 5 is peers. It's the way kids relate to one another. And or at least the third big circle is peers, and the fifth little circle is what I call the conspiracy to succeed. We survey kids, and we find that they are afraid to openly aspire to high achievement because they're fearful that their friends won't approve. So we ask questions like, look for levels of agreement on things like, sometimes I pretend I'm not trying hard in this class even when I really am trying hard. So they're hiding effort. Other times they agree. Sometimes I hold back from doing my best because of what other students might say or think. And students from all racial groups agree way more than they should with these statements about hiding effort and holding back. Then we have a couple open-ended questions we've asked on some surveys, one of which is, please list some things that students at your school do so that other students will like them. Virtually everything they list is negative. Being disruptive in class, teasing other people, it's all negative. Things that students do so that other people will like them. Then we ask, if you were in charge and you could decide what's cool and what's popular, what would you have be cool and popular? It's 100% positive. It's the polar opposite. It's the inverse of the first list of things that kids do to be liked. It's a better list than their parents and teachers would have written. Okay. Then we ask, what would you have be not popular? And it's all the stuff on the first list, things that kids actually do to get attention from each other. There's a sense in which young people are trapped in their own peer culture. They're being oppressed by a set of forces that they, as individuals, can't control. And they actually go along with those forces and enforce them on other people. Okay? So you've got a kid who's off task in class, who's passing notes, who's doing stuff. He actually wants to be paying attention to the teacher and learning. But he also wants his friends to like him. He doesn't want anybody to give him a hard time in the hall about being a suck-up to the teacher when they didn't really contribute. So we've got to find ways to free kids up. And one notion is, the nice thing is we don't have to change their values. Their values are already pretty much the same as their parents and their teachers. But they're trapped in this adolescent peer culture that puts them under some pressure, they think, to behave differently. And so if we can help them craft a peer culture that allows them to behave more in line with what they're already their preferences, the values they already have, we could be way ahead, and it might not be nearly as hard as we think it is, because it's the state of the world they already want. Now, one of the problems is that the current state of affairs does provide ego protection for low achievers, for the kids who struggle. Because if everybody's pretending, well, it's not that important, we don't really care that much, then you don't get a big status hierarchy that grows up around achievement and everybody can feel kind of cool. Okay? So we've got to find ways to support the status, to provide ego protection for the kids who struggle, so that they can all admit that they really do want to do well, and they really do want to do the right thing. And I'm thinking something like a parallel grading structure that recognizes and rewards and celebrates improvement. So, for example, you might get recognized for how much of the gap between your grade point average at the end of the last semester and a 4.0, straight A grade point average you close. So how much of that gap, what percentage of it? Okay, and a kid who's getting straight D's can close some percentage of it. A kid who got B plus can close some percentage of it. Be on the stage together getting recognized that they both cut it in half, right? And so finding some way, and that may not be exactly the right way, but some way to do it. So that's a conspiracy to succeed, is about enabling young people to achieve the kind of a peer culture of achievement that they already really want, but that they aren't free to create. There is a phrase in the literature since 1934 that captures this idea. More recently, there are a bunch of interventions that work on this, but usually not in the context of education. There are lots of different contexts where people's perception of what the norm is affects their own behavior, even when they really don't like the norm. Okay? Most of this research has been done in the context of drinking and sexuality on college campuses. Everybody thinks that everybody else thinks you got to be drunk to have a good time. So they get drunk even when they really don't want to get drunk. Okay? And so the research goes in and gives them evidence that everybody else really doesn't think what you think they thought. Okay? And it helps to reduce the amount of intoxication on college campuses. It hasn't been applied to middle schools and high schools with regard to the kind of stuff I'm talking about, but the same kind of human nature dynamic is relevant, and I'm arguing that we need to address that. So that's the fourth circle. The fifth circle, that's also the second circle on peers, has to do with the way kids treat each other in cooperative learning groups. Teachers often assign students to work on a project together. Go solve these math problems together, go do this other project together. And what happens that's almost often invisible to the teacher is that the high achievers are intellectual bullies sometimes in those groups. They put down the kids who struggle academically. They make them feel badly about themselves. And so you can get a low achiever finishing a group project feeling even more inept than before the project started. So we've got to find ways to help kids work together in ways that lift them up. Okay? And actually, I learned that here. 10 years ago almost, there was a project that was trying to help some kids do better in middle school math and was giving them preparation in elementary school. And we went in and interviewed them after they got to middle school, when they often weren't doing as well as we thought they should have been doing. And the stories we got back from those kids often entailed some intellectual bullying in the work groups, that they weren't being treated nicely by their peers when they came together to work together, and that, among other things, undermined some of their success in those groups. Okay? Now, next big circle is employers. And the idea here is that we need to get employers engaged. And let me tell you, employers, at least the big guys, the ones that are the large CEOs of large corporations and so on, they are scared today. We had a summit, a business summit in North Carolina, and I was trying to decide whether I went up to speak, whether I was going to talk about this movement notion, because I thought it might seem too touchy-feely for some of the business people. And before I got to go up, one of the senior executives from GlaxoSmithKline, the drug company, said, "Hey, we've been meeting for 20 years. We need to have a movement." And then somebody from the National Chamber of Commerce got up and started talking about a movement. They are concerned that unless we take it up a big notch, we're not going to be able to replace the baby boom generation when they retire. I'm a member of the baby boom generation. We're retiring now over the next 15 years or so. Our society is shifting racially. By mid-century, we will be majority non-white. There are already 10 states where a majority of the children are children of color. It may already be the case today that the majority of babies born in the U.S. are children of color. Okay. We're shifting toward a workforce that's going to be disproportionately from our lower achieving groups. And unless we raise achievement to levels we have never seen before in mass from all our groups, we're not going to be able to replace the baby boom generation in terms of the skill level. And the employers across the country, they're big employer organizations, the big business organizations, are getting riled up now. They're getting afraid. They know we need to deal with this. And so we need the employers engaged, and the employers are starting to figure out that they need to be engaged. So there's a series of types of employer engagement that I think need to come in around 5th grade and then be scaffolded all the way into college. In 5th grade, we need to get employers and other adult organizations to help us get grown-ups into 5th grade classrooms to tell their life stories, beginning when they were 5th graders. There's a program in Boston called They Made It, So Can You, or So Can I. They Made It, So Can I. I kind of want to have it maybe be, I used to be you, and they go into the classrooms. We need to get adults who are pretty satisfied with their lives and who are all kinds of different jobs, from low income to high income, but can go into classrooms and say, hey, I put a life together, and I used to be you. And when they do this, the kids kind of grab on because they can see the insecurities come out in people's voices and in their stories, and the kids can relate to it. And then people talk about the pathways that they followed to rise from being a 10-year-old in 5th grade to being an adult with a job and a career. Right now, if you were to ask 10th grade, 10-year-olds to tell you the story about some pathways from being 10-year-old in 5th grade to being a 25-year-old with a job, tell me a story, how do you get from here to there? Most of them wouldn't have a clue because we don't give them any support to have a clue. Right? So if every month or two, each 5th grade classroom could have a visitor from an adult who's put together a life and is pretty satisfied with it, can come talk about what life was like when they were in 5th grade and what they've done since then to put a life together. Across the school year, if you did that 5th and 6th grade, they'd have a whole menu of possible selves to think about. We have a project at Harvard that's really linked to the Achievement Gap Initiative that I run that's called the Pathways to Prosperity Project. And that project is about building a system of pathways even for the kids who are not likely to become four-year college graduates. Right? We're pretending in the College for All movement that everybody's going to get a four-year college degree. Well, guess what? Only about a third of our kids get a four-year college degree. Most of the rest don't, and a lot of them are lost because we've underdeveloped the system for them. And we can aspire to hugely increase the percentage who get four-year college degrees. But if we tell the truth, there are a lot of people who are not going to get four-year college degrees. They need pathways too. We need employers to help us with that. So we get the 5th and 6th grade classrooms, and we started getting plant visits in middle school, and then employers come in and help with the counseling in high schools, and then apprenticeships in high schools, and then integrated work and learning at community college levels. There's a lot we could do better. Okay. Then the rest of the circles are really quick. The circle number 8, I know you're trying to signal me to give the audience questions by walking around with the mic over there. I see you. So circle number 8 is jobs, and particularly apprenticeships for kids and jobs for parents. Circle 9 is on the community circle, standard community supports. And then circle 10 is just building community more generally. Places to be and connect and belong and feel a sense of community. Those 10 circles, if we can do those things better, we got a movement. And it's important to do it. We're already kind of doing it, but we need to do it better. So parenting, parent-school engagement, improved teaching, learning about our kids from studying their work, helping kids launch a conspiracy to succeed, helping to improve the way they work together in cooperative learning groups, getting employers into school to help out, having employers provide apprenticeships and other supports for youth, having the community provide supports to parents and families that need it, and just having communities have ways to come together like this to be communities and support young people. So I'll stop with that and open it up for conversation.
I enjoyed your presentation. Can you just tell me a little bit about how does cultural relevance pedagogy fit in your scheme?
Okay, the question is, how does culturally relevant pedagogy fit in the scheme? Okay, the notion of culturally relevant pedagogy is a matter of trying to teach children in ways that fit well with the home culture from which they come. And it's got to do both with methods and with the content. I usually don't use the phrase because I talk about just teachers serving kids well. Okay? And when teachers teach well, they get to know their students. And they try to match their approaches with what they think their students need. So if you know that a number of your students are coming from households where a child doesn't take a request seriously unless it's shouted at them, okay, then you figure out how to work with that child differently from where you know another child's parent always speaks in soft tones. Okay, and you can say that those two differences in style are being sensitive to differences in the home culture. There's some cultures where a child is told never to disrespect, never to question an adult at all, never critique an adult at all, especially some Asian cultures. And so in those, you don't have a classroom exercise where you have kids, where the game is to find the mistake that the teacher made. Okay, because they'll never speak up. Okay, but I think there's some fundamental general principles about what good teaching is, that where the application may be a bit different depending upon the kids you're working with and where they come from. And I think I talk about what I call the 7 C's of effective instruction. Caring, controlling is just keeping an orderly classroom, so it's not absolute dictatorship. So caring, controlling, clarifying, challenging, captivating, conferring, and consolidating. So we can have our kids think, you really matter to your teacher. Your teacher's sensitive to your needs. Okay, that's caring. The second is control. And our class is orderly. It doesn't waste a lot of time. Kids behave the way my teacher wants them to. People respect each other. That's control. Clarify is being able to explain things clearly, clear up confusion. So our survey questions to get at that might be, if you don't understand something, my teacher explains it another way. My teacher has lots of good ways to explain each topic that we cover. And some of those explanations may need to be culturally sensitive. Okay. Challenge is about challenging students to both work hard and think hard. So my teacher doesn't let students give up when the work gets hard. And my teacher wants us to really understand the material, not just memorize it. So that's challenge. Captivate is about making it interesting and stimulating, not really boring. Conferring is about interacting with the students, getting feedback from them, having them express their and develop their ideas. And consolidate is about summarizing, synthesizing, tying it all together so it makes sense and it's easy to remember. Okay. I actually have a sheet in one of my PowerPoints where I just kind of spell out what it means to have a culturally sensitive, a culturally responsive approach to each of those 7 C's. Okay. But the fundamental are those 7 C's. And we've shown recently our project as part of the Gates Foundation project in measuring effective teaching, where surveys that measure those 7 C's, now we've discovered, predict how much kids learn from one year to the next. Value-added achievement gains. All right? And so, anyway.
Mr. President, you talked about that diagram.
Yeah.
Okay. Up on that diagram, you said there was another diagram of going in each direction. Correct? The diagram that was supposed to be maybe somewhere in the small diagram, something like you and lost in.
Oh, okay. We talked about a couple diagrams. You're talking about the arrows in it.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. The area that our youngsters are in.
Yes.
Most of them have no point.
Never what?
They have no point on the left.
Yes. Yes.
Not arrow.
Right.
How do we get a point on the line to show where the direction is going?
That, when I talk about getting people into 5th grade classrooms to tell their life stories, you have to give kids images of possible selves. You know, if you want to make something of your life, what are your options? What does it even look like? All right? You got to interact with them. You've got to give them exposure. And there are different ways that we can do it, but right now we aren't that organized to do it. Okay? If I was going to talk for a lot longer, I would talk about the regional power structure that we need to make this happen. Okay? I think we need to have all the most powerful folks in the region who control resources, the big corporations, the university presidents, the senior elected officials, come together and agree we're going to make this happen. And then they need to put in place one or more intermediary organizations with really good people running them that kind of keep track of what's going on. Okay? Make sure that they don't do everything, but they instigate it. We need instigators, you know, to help make things happen around. But it's not going to happen accidentally. It's going to happen only on purpose. It's not going to happen only bottom up. Because only bottom up doesn't have enough resources to make it happen. It's got to happen top down, middle out, and bottom up. Got to do with politics. But the vision is where we start. Schools that really turn around, they start with a vision statement. And then people start holding themselves accountable for living up to it. Okay? We can talk about that, but some other time maybe, about what that might look like. And then how we put in place the structures through which we live up to our shared obligations.
Thank you. Talk about the implementation so far and how do we take it to the next level.
Talk about implementation. Okay. One way to think about this is each of us has a limited reach, right? Each of us individually has a sphere of influence. And so part of my aspiration is to help spark folks to look to have as much influence as they can within their own sphere. Okay, we can all stand back and talk about what somebody else needs to do to get it implemented. But the question is, look in the mirror and say, what do you need to do? Is where we start. And when I talked about this regional structure, we're trying to, in our Pathways to Prosperity project, we're trying to get several states and some large metropolitan regions to be demonstration sites to show what it looks like when you put all this together, right? What it would look like when you put it all together is that you've got, and actually in Cincinnati, this thing called Strive. All the large power broker organizations are together. If you serve little kids, if you got a nonprofit and you're working with little kids in Cincinnati, you can't get any grant funding if you're not a part of Strive. And if you are a part of Strive, you've got to do all the same paperwork as everybody else who's a part of Strive for accountability and quality control kinds of purposes. And in certain meetings, if you're in a certain role, you better be at the meeting. Okay? And so there are regional structures that we need in order to organize the work. And within those regional structures is an ethos that we kind of have to cultivate. Because a lot of what needs to happen is stuff that we can't force people to do. It's things that people need to do with their discretion. Okay? The things that parents need to do. We can't go in people's houses and make sure they're talking to their kids a lot and using games with their 2-year-olds and having a discussion during bedtime reading with a 3-year-old. We can get the message to them. We can have the grandmothers and aunts and uncles ask once in a while, you doing that stuff with your baby yet? Okay? We can just try to create conditions for people to do this. And meanwhile, we can also have those superstructures. We need, I don't know if people from the most influential business community or business organizations are in the room right now. I just don't know. But we need the folks who control the power in the region to decide we're going to make this happen. Okay? And that's going to set up some tension because people who don't have a lot of power are going to say, you guys are trying to tell us what to do. Fine, let's do the politics. Let's work through it. Let's get to the point where we've got it all in place. But one way or another, there are experiences that kids need to have. And we need to organize, be sure they have that. And we need to think of what are all the structures above that help to make it really likely that the kids will experience what they have to do. And we'd be here all day talking about all the details of it. But that's what we need to think through and work through.
This relates to the short arrow pointing to a little objective quadrant there.
Yeah, and he's saying people haven't told the kid what their arrow, haven't they'll find their point, or even know there is a point out there.
It reminds me of, I think it was last week, we had a guest speaker, also from Cleveland, United Nations. He was a co-founder of Adobe Systems. And someone in the audience asked, what is it that kept him up at night? And he said, well, the number one thing is the small amount of science and engineering graduates that are leaving American children. He said it's getting fewer and fewer each year, which I think we all could live in. That most of our engineering and science graduates are foreign-born. So the question was, how do we get to that little point, that little arrow is heading toward, to be a science and engineering goal? One of the things that he suggested, I certainly interested in your suggestion, was have a wall of heroes in the schools, like the biography of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Thomas Edison. and I'm wondering what you think.
I think there are two big issues. One issue is it okay for somebody like me to do that? And each kid is saying, well, some people do that, but people like me don't do that. So that's one thing your wall of heroes might do with some of that. The other piece of it is, can I do that? Am I smart enough to do that kind of thing? Okay. For the am I smart enough piece of it, we need to give children experiences being successful with science and math. Okay. We need to scaffold the teaching and the learning in ways that they can actually experience what it feels like to be successful, and also maybe what it feels like to be creative with it. To have problem-solving experiences where they end up feeling like celebrating after they've done something using science and math tools. Okay, so crafting those opportunities is one piece of it. The other piece about, is it okay for somebody like me to do that? It's partly about giving them examples of people like them who have done it. It's also partly about just being clear as a family and a community that you're giving them permission even to do that. It's okay for somebody like you to do that. There are some cases where if kids get too ambitious too early and they're from a family that's not very well off, the family actually worries that my child might outgrow me. Okay? And the parent can feel guilty about feeling that way, but they still can be less than fully supportive, okay, in that. There's a sellout guilt the kids can get about moving too far away from their community. There's a survivor's guilt that they can get, okay. So helping to work on the psychology of breaking through those barriers is a little bit more than having a list of other people who've done it. And again, that's a longer conversation too, but it is really important. And I have a footnote to that. I use a lot of math, but I don't do science. I do social science. Okay? And helping kids to understand that they can use math to help go back and solve problems in the communities they come from. I grew up planning to be a city planner because when I was about 9 years old, we lived at 118th and Imperial. I don't know if you know where that is. Okay? We lived in this little apartment building at 118th and Imperial. Still there, 4-unit apartment building. That's where we lived. And I looked around, we were better off than some of the other folks who lived around us. And I asked somebody, what job do you do as an adult to make things better and help people's lives? And I forget exactly how I put it, but that's what I was trying to ask. And whoever I asked said city planner. So from the time I was 8 or 9, I was planning to grow up and be a city planner. Okay, to make a long story short, I found my way into economics, got a PhD from MIT in economics, and started teaching at Harvard, still on that same agenda. Okay, and I'm still standing here today on that same agenda. And I use math a lot to do what I do. So helping kids to find things in the world that they care about, that they can apply math to work on. Okay, and it's about that little point, finding your point, what you think you're supposed to get done, and then figuring out what tools you need to use to do it, and then setting out to actually get it done. Thank you.
Dr. Ferguson, I'm always talking about academic alignment and academic rigor being distributed equally, and I'm wondering about initiatives that would not only allow Eastsiders to compete with Westsiders, but Clevelanders to compete with the STRIVE program in Cincinnati and even, in other states.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the initiatives that address academic rigor and equity across not only the city, but
all right. Well, first of all, obviously, leadership has got to be central. And you look at what it looks like and how do we put it in place and support it. Second point is that we need to be careful when we're trying to follow practice and learning and even know where the rigor is there, to look at learning gains. How much does what kids know and can do change from one year to the next? We can get very misled by just looking at levels. Okay, you can have high schools where kids have high test scores, high pass rates, where they aren't learning anything. because they went into high school with already having a lot of skill. Okay? You can have kids that get to kindergarten and their mothers have been great teachers at home. And so they already know the first 3 years of curriculum because they've learned it at home. They're not getting it at school. If you just look at the levels, you assume they're learning a whole lot. Okay? So we've got to look at gains, and it's tricky to measure those accurately, so you need people who know what they're doing producing those measures. Okay? But then the question is, how do we actually have kids experience learning differently? Because fundamentally what you're asking about is how do we supply kids with different learning experiences? Okay? And to get there, we've got to supply adults with different learning experiences. Because from where we sit, we can't reach and touch the child. We have to reach through a bunch of grown-ups to get to those kids. We have to get those grown-ups to do something differently from what they're already doing. And so the question is, how can we give those grown-ups different learning experiences so they would give the kids different learning experiences? And I thought this gentleman over here, when he was talking about asking the guy what keeps him up at night, I thought he was going to ask him what keeps me up at night. Okay. What keeps me up at night is trying to figure out how to get adults to do things differently. Okay? We're designing an intervention right now where we're going to give adults back their survey results from what their kids said about their effectiveness. And then we want to work with the teachers to help them improve in response to what their students said about their effectiveness. And what we're trying to, what's keeping us up at night right now, is trying to be sure that we've got some ways to support the adults that will get them actually to try something different. Okay? In their classroom. So the question is, what do the adult learning experiences need to be so that they will give the children learning experiences that are more rigorous? Okay, and I'm not going to try to answer that right now, but that's the question we need to work on. We're only going to get to the kids through the grown-ups. Yes.
So thank you, Dr. Ferguson, for coming and doing a really great presentation. Just sitting here thinking about digesting what the presentation today, the points you made, and everything sounds really logical and simple, actually. Nothing sounds, out of the world. Everything sounds really doable.
That's what I want you to come away with. We can do this. Okay.
The question is, the rhetoric from our school is about money.
It's also about what? Money?
Right. District,
right.
Because we don't have enough money. Teachers are getting. So my question is, what sort of barriers have you faced in actually implementing these things in other fields? Because everything sounds really simple and doable. So why isn't everybody just doing it?
Leadership. Okay. When people decide they're going to make things happen, they make things happen. Okay. We put out a report a year ago on exemplary high schools. Okay, you can download it off our website, the same web address I gave you before. I think even on the home page, I think it's a tab there. And we looked at schools that have fundamentally turned around over the last 10 years. And the ones that have done the best jobs, what they did didn't depend on having more money. What it depended upon was having a small community of grown-ups in the building who set some non-negotiables about how we're going to work together and learn together. Okay. My favorite example is the biggest high school in the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts passed a law almost 15 years ago. The kids had to pass the state test to graduate from high school. In this particular school, when that law passed, somebody was said to have said, we got the most kids in any school in the state, but if this thing goes through, we're going to be able to have graduation in a classroom. So many, a few of our kids are going to pass. They said that's just unethical. We got to do better. So where they are now is that every adult in the building has to teach English language arts, for example. So every class has serious writing assignments that are graded using a building level rubric for how you judge quality student work that the faculty has come to consensus on. Okay? So what quality looks like has been explicitly defined. Everybody's got to get 1 or 2 assignments a year. So even gym and art and health, they get serious writing assignments. Those assignments, after they are graded, teachers have to hand them in to the department chairs. And then they sit with the department chair, and the department chair goes over both the grading and the student work for quality. And you have discussions with the teachers. And then the department chair takes a sample of the work and sits with the associate principal and get supervised on the feedback that they gave to the teachers, on the feedback the teachers gave to the kids. Everybody's work is visible, quality standards are clearly defined and even upgraded when they decide they need some revisions in them, and everybody's got to play. If you work in that building, you're going to get writing assignments, you're going to judge them by the rubric, and if you don't, then somebody's going to be sitting in front of you asking why not, and it's going to be very uncomfortable. Okay? And so they've got definitions of quality, they've got ideas about what you do to achieve quality, and they have arrangements in place by which you are made to feel very uncomfortable if you're not doing your job, okay, and living up to it. One place I asked the principal, one of the schools that gets one of the highest math score gains in the state, what she does when people aren't really playing along, aren't doing what they need to be doing. She said, I don't have to do anything, the teachers handle it. Okay? In the very strongest schools, the teacher professional community monitors and disciplines each other, and the leaders, the administrators don't have to do anything. We just surveyed in one big school district where they do fall and spring testing. And so we can look at achievement gains from September to May. We can rank order the schools on that. We surveyed the teachers in that district. And we can look to see what predicts which schools are getting the biggest learning gains versus not the biggest learning gains. The schools that are getting the biggest learning gains are those in which the teachers feel under the most pressure from their colleagues to produce excellent instruction. Okay? And in those schools, they have norms and procedures and a culture where teaching is visible, quality is explicitly defined, you get feedback on your work regularly. Okay? So it's all within the existing contract. People not being asked to do anything that people in positions of authority don't already have authority to ask them to do. But you need a small group of strong personalities in leadership positions, and they can even be informal leadership positions, where folks just know that I'm going to be made to feel pretty uncomfortable if I don't do my best to serve children, and there are going to be arrangements in place to help me if I need help. Just like we talk about having high expectations for children and not giving up on children and saying, I will not let you fail, we need to say that to the adults. We will support you, we won't let you fail unless you decide you just don't want to be here, in which case maybe we'll help you find another place to be. But if you're going to be here, we're going to work hard, we're going to achieve excellence, and we're going to be proud of it. Okay? Some things do cost money, so I don't want to say money's never a barrier, but it also shouldn't be an excuse.
Hey, Brother Church, we've been listening to a City Club in the City. Special tour featuring Dr. Ronald Ferguson, Senior Lecturer in Education and Public Policy at John F. Kennedy School of Government. Dr. Ferguson's book will be available at the parlor by Cultural Exchange. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson.